Have you ever correctly had a gut feeling to dislike someone who on the surface was a cool person that everybody else liked? My friend brought her new guy over. He was a cashier at a gas station we all frequented. My dog, who was a chill AF man's dog, tried to take the guy's hand off whenever he would get close enough. He didn't let the guy near my friend's knees. Was super vigilant whenever the guy was in sight. Anyways, a year later he is in jail for child support evasion and child porn. Awaiting trial. Never doubted my dog's opinion on people. Yes, this always happens to me. Here's one time. At my school there's a sorority that a bunch of my friends are in. And one of the coolest and most popular girls in the sorority that even my friends loved I just always felt weird around. Like she was fake and annoying. She ended up being the finance chair or something of the sorority, and during the year all my friends in the sorority were talking about how the organization's budget was FKD up or something and they didn't know how they were going to afford their semi-formal plans. When my friend was telling me this I made the comment, "Watch, this girl, like secretly stealing money or something," which of course no one would suspect because everyone loved this girl. And my friend was like, "I think she's just too dumb to figure out where the money is coming from." Obviously something was more expensive than she thought to budget for. Turns out I was right. About half a year later they realized that this girl had stolen like over $20,000 from the organization. My BF was introducing me to some of his friends back home and I was really excited and anxious because I'm like, fuck yeah, I'm about to be one of the boys. Anyways, a lot of his friends were very nice and goofy. Except one, let's call him G. G didn't talk to me very much at all and was quiet as well as judgmental. Whenever we even made eye contact it's like a switch flipped and he would glare at me. But with others he would shyly smile. At first I thought I was looking into it too much and maybe he's just like socially awkward or has a resting bitch face and we're overstimulating him with all our jokes and shit. However, this was not the case. I started trying to talk to him one-on-one while we were traveling as a group around this amusement park. Not for his benefit but because I really wanted to do my best to have my BF's friends like me. He wasn't really engaged in our convo so I decided I'd see what the F he's staring at. First he was looking at this family so I thought nothing weird, maybe he wants a family someday. Next I caught him staring at 3 little girls in a group they couldn't have been any older than 8. I thought I randomly doze off and stare at people, maybe that's the case here? Nope. We took a bathroom break and I watched him fully, disgustingly check out this probably 9-year-old from head to toe. I was horrified, and I thought yep, fuck this, I got to tell my BF something. Told him. He said that G and he don't get along that well but G is friends with other people in the group so that's why he's included. Turns out after this 2 events occurred. G had a girl come forward who says he raped her and forced her into some weird little girl kinky shit. Secondly, the FBI found a website that G made that was purely child porn. G is now awaiting trial and is probably looking at life due to the amount of child porn he had. The heck with people and niceties, trust your gut. There was a girl in my 5th grade class who was very quiet and soft-spoken but was still friends with almost everyone in class. They loved her but I was just put off by her. I never really understood why until one day I drew a very pretty flower in the corner of the whiteboard. Small and out of the way. But it was beautiful and I was proud of it. The teacher left it there and continued using the whiteboard and would erase everything except for my flower. At the end of class, quiet girl asked the teacher if she could clean the whiteboard and when the teacher said yes she went straight for my flower while making eye contact with me. I'll never forget it. There was this dude in a class below me. Always got a weird feeling from the dude, a little creepy. 3 years later, I'm opening the newspaper and his face is on the second page with a big ass black censoring over his eyes. Turns out he had sex with a 13-year-old on holiday and got arrested. He was 22. I walked into an interview, nailed it, and was hired for a 3-month trial. Went home and told my husband that the office manager didn't like me, so I wouldn't be there long. Did she say anything? No. It was just a feeling. He said I was paranoid. 1 week before the 3-month deadline, after I had caught up all her paperwork, I was laid off. It has happened to me a few times. I hate being right. Yup. Some of my friends and I used to organize catch-ups to discuss a favorite TV show of ours. One day, A new person turns up. He's boisterous, says he works in the music industry and is dating a female member of a popular, at the time, pop group. He even claims he was present during the making of one of their songs and her vocals were about him. He integrates himself in the group. My gut is telling me he's full of it and there's something about him I can't put my finger on. A couple of people in my social group soon find out the singer he mentioned was not his girlfriend as they come across a magazine article about her. He pretty much disappears from our lives after being tackled about this. Over 10 years after this happens, it turns out he has made some headlines in local newspapers as he'd been arrested and charged over pretending to be a police officer and fraud. Plus it turns out he was charged as a sex offender. Since then I've found out he'd been released from prison, but charged again with fraud. Last I heard, he was serving time. Yes. There was this one guy in my class that was known for being smart by making online businesses and actually profiting from them. He also seemed nice on the outside but I always knew there was something fishy about him. One day he had a birthday party at his house, and a bunch of people came, including me because a lot of my friends went too. When we were there, we decided that we were going to change his laptop's background to something weird and funny as a joke. Then we found a folder on his computer called CP, which no one at the time knew what that stands for except me. It stands for child porn. Turns out the money he makes was from selling child porn to pedophiles on the dark web. He was suspended from school and forced to stay in his room until further notice. This all happened pretty recently, so it still isn't decided what his punishment will be. There was this old dude that was fresh out of prison that my cousin took into his home. He was the uncle of a friend of my cousin's and the man's nephew didn't have room for him or whatever. And so my cousin took him in with good intentions. Well, everyone thought he was cool and shit because he paid his rent and helped out around the house. And although I talked to him, he never sat well with me. I don't know, I just got weird vibes from the guy. I even mentioned it to my cousin and my aunt that they needed to watch out for him because something was off. Well, one day, when I went over there while my cousin was at work, his wife told me that the motherfucker had been coming onto her. She and I used to be really close and we could talk to each other about anything. Sadly, she passed away 5 years ago in a car accident. She said that he was crazy and that he told her he was in love with her, and that she should leave my cousin and take her kids and run away with him. I was completely floored. It felt like I got hit with a ton of bricks. But anyway, I asked her if she had told my cousin about that and she said no, because she was scared. And I told her that if she didn't that I would. So we left it at that, and a few days later my aunt told me that there was a big scene at my cousin's that morning. I guess they called the cops on the bastard because my cousin and his wife were in their room and the motherfucker walked in his underwear and was all high on meth. And that he was telling my cousin's wife a bunch of shit. So I guess there was a little scuffle between my cousin and that man. My cousin's wife called the cops and they took his ass in. From what I knew about the man, he was still on parole. And I guess when the cops showed up he got combative with them and even kicked one of them in the nuts. And right after that, they called his nephew to go get all his shit. And glad to say that was the last time we ever saw him. It's never intentional for me, as if I go looking for a reason to dislike them. It just happens naturally. There was this one guy that got introduced to my group of friends by a mutual friend and everybody really liked him at first, but I was always iffy about him. Being a naturally quiet person, I usually remain that way with someone to allow them to make an impression, and right away this guy turned into one of those people that always had to one-up someone else's story. Always talked about how much better his other group of friends was. Talked shit behind people's back and always needed attention on him, so after a couple months everybody else finally started picking up on what I had felt all along. That's not the type of person I don't want to be around, so I just avoid him the best I can. Not a wild story, but in the end I was right. My ex-roomie was manipulative as fuck and his friends didn't even realize how many eggshells they were stepping on just spending time with him. It's not that they were ignorant of it or anything. They had just been friends so long that he had found all the little ways to make them doubt themselves and get what he wanted out of them. He would be so passive-aggressively difficult whenever he was in a situation he wasn't enjoying. Up until people started to get sick of it when he would put a nice face back on. Until various points where he snapped. He thought his friends should take his hide in everything, because otherwise they aren't loyal, even though he was 100% wrong and totally out of line. He would give unwarranted advice and demand people did everything his way, and was in general a whiny and judgmental bitch. He once even said, while his friend who was suffering the after effects of acne was in the room, about a drag queen on TV, no offense, but they should be kicked off because her acne is so ugly. Yes. Told my ex-girl to stay away from him, that he was trying to sleep with her. She didn't believe me. Later she finds out he's telling everyone they were doing it when they weren't. A new sales guy got hired at my last job, and while most sales guys gave me a bad vibe, this one was different. I hated being around him and felt extremely uncomfortable the minute he would walk into the room, and I was shocked when everyone else thought he was a cool guy. My co-workers would say things like, "Poor Phil can't see his teenage daughter anymore because the courts are unjust and only gave custody to the mom." And I would just sit there thinking that I would never let a teenage girl in the room alone with this guy. Eventually, in a sales meeting, Phil started screaming at the sales manager and got fired. But that wasn't the end. This guy slashed the manager's and his wife's car tires at their home in the middle of the night. And they felt so unsafe they had lived in a hotel for a week until they could move into a new home. And then, we had to change all the locks at the office because he wouldn't give his key back. Yes. I had a teacher people seemed to love. He became head of the whole school on an acting basis for a while too. I just couldn't explain why I had such a yuck feeling. Anyway, fast forward 10 years and he's done for touching young girls inappropriately. Yes. One teacher at my school when I was in 3rd grade. He wasn't my teacher, but he taught the 4th grade back then. I hated him. Didn't want him close and kicked him in the nuts a couple of times. I was an abused kid who didn't trust adults in general, and if they touched me, I'd lose my shit. Everyone loved him. Students, teachers, parents. They all doted on him. Said that he was amazing, kind and loving. Funny, dedicated and all in all a great guy. My mom, a cleaning lady at my school, told me that he used to mock his students behind their backs. For example, "Lol, this stupid bitch doesn't even know how to write." He also tried to flirt with my mom and my mom instantly rejected him. And he got very offended and started to belittle my mom, saying that she was nothing, and he didn't even want her. My mom said that there was something off with him, even before all that. Well, some odd years later, when I'd already left high school behind, I found out that he was fired when a student came forward saying that he was touching her inappropriately. I heard, through the grapevine, that it wasn't just touching. Don't know where he is right now, because it's been years since I last heard anything about him. When the first PlayStation came out, we got one for Christmas, but because the games were so expensive we didn't get many of them. In comes one of our neighbors offering to chip our PlayStation and get games from him a lot cheaper. My dad jumps at the chance. We got loads of games, then my dad started asking me to go to the neighbor's house to pick up the games he ordered. I hated going over there. He always creeped me out and generally gave me super bad vibes. I told my dad time and time again that I didn't want to go over there because he creeped me out, but he said I was being stupid and that the neighbor was a great guy. All the neighbors loved him. Cut to a few months later. I sat watching TV with my family and we heard a police siren, so we got outside and 6 police cars had pulled up. And an ambulance. The police pulled our creepy neighbor out and shoved him in the back of one of the cars. And eventually the paramedics bring out someone in a body bag. Turns out that the neighbor everyone loved beat his wife to death in their house in front of their kids, then kept her body there for 3 weeks. Someone reported the smell and that's how he got found out. Knew some chick that my dad knew. She was living at his house and seemed like his best friend but just seemed like a bad apple. I was correct to dislike her since she seemed a bit too interested in putting herself in our lives, my brother's and my father's life, and she would regularly try and do favors for us and dress skimpy. I knew she was there for the free place to stay and to perhaps marry him. My dad was a smart guy and this was the only time he's ever been manipulated. I brought it up to him over and over again, so he just kept us separated at first. Later in that year he moved houses and had her leave. This proved my theory that she always had a place to go. She was always in the shadow of our lives and always found her way into our lives. She joined us for our Disney trip and even took me to the doctors and left me there when I was sick as fuck. Smart for some young chick in her 20s, and admittedly she was kind of hot. I finally managed to convince my dad to distance her from our family and we managed to spend some time together without her, even taking me and my brothers to Ecuador, which he wanted to do for a long time. He then relapsed when she made him take her to Ecuador too, when they were only there to deal with my grandmother's house. My dad later that year got terminal cancer and she still tried to stay in our lives. My mother, who divorced my dad but was still his best friend, stayed by his side from beginning to end and never played up her grief. But the chick who we called Patty, the one I've been talking about up to this point, considered herself a widow and posted it all over Facebook and Instagram. My mom handled everything from his funeral arrangements to his will and house. He died on October 24th of last year, and the night before he died, Patty showed up and crawled into his small bed. It took my mom, my stepdad, and my brothers and I kicking her family out and forcing them to leave my dad's house that she finally got her ass out. It was a quiet night and the funeral was a week later, during which time she showed up against my wishes and even had the audacity to speak on the podium, stating falsely how much she knew him and how much she had grown to know me and my brothers. After he was buried, she had the audacity to as well ask for $10,000 that my dad supposedly left her. We didn't acquiesce. I haven't seen her in a while, but she didn't acknowledge us when we walked into a restaurant she was just leaving. Later that night she posted about how much she missed my dad and how much he meant to her. I hope she rots in hell along with her opportunist family and friends. At uni, there was this guy who was friends with my group of friends. We'd end up on the same nights out occasionally and he was friendly, but something about him put me off a little. But I only saw him once every few months, so it wasn't a big deal. 2 years later and we're at a party and I finally decide that he's alright and he's not creepy. We learn the next day that he raped our friend Tony, not his real name, twice that night. We dropped this guy like a hot rock after that. My friend didn't want to tell anyone, so we comforted him, protected him and tried to avoid the rapist as much as possible. The next year though, my friend and his rapist end up living together for several months in a 2-bed apartment. The whole situation was fucked up and I sincerely that man goes to prison for life. F you Steven, you utter cunt. My brother introduced me to his co-workers once, and this one guy seemed cool to everyone else. But I got an inexplicably bad vibe from him. Like the look in his eyes was slightly off. But no one else saw it. Anyways, a couple years later his mugshot is on the news for murdering, decapitating, transporting to a field, and burning the corpse of his roommate. Drugs weren't ruled out and the official motive was disagreement over rent. Yep, couple of times. I was right in both cases. In others, though, I've been drastically wrong.
This is RedditJoe channel, and don't forget to hit subscribe down below for more upcoming videos.